All right. Well, as you can see on the front of the bulletin, we are starting a new series called Jonah. And so we're going to be going through the book of Jonah, and I'm really excited for this. My challenge to you is that Jonah is often covered as a kid's story. We have probably all heard of Jonah getting swallowed by what we would say a whale, but it's really just a big fish. And so we know that story. And so there's a lot of times when you're comfortable with something and you know something, you don't always look at it in quite the right way. You just assume that you know the story. The book of Jonah is really interesting. It's actually a pretty amazing story of God's compassion and his mercy. And so that's why we're going through it. And to start off, we're going to go and introduce, we're only going to cover 3 verses today, but we're going to slowly just walk through the book of Jonah. And so when I started in student ministry, we had an event called Mud Bowl. And so Mud Bowl was this giant mud obstacle course, and we would pull anywhere from like 200 to 300 students every time we did this each year. And so the first year I did it, I tried to do everything myself. I just graduated from college, and I thought that I could do everything and anything I wanted to, and I didn't need help. And so I did this whole thing by myself and had the help of some people here and there. But most of the part, it was just my planning and everything like that. And I look back and I was so foolish. I think I could do everything myself. But the second year I wised up a little bit. And so I was looking for help in that. And so I started looking for the church through the church and asking around who could help me. And one person's name kept coming up and coming up. And there's always positive things that are being said about this person. And eventually my hope would be that he would not only be able to help with Mud Bowl, but that he might be able to help within the student ministry because we were growing and we needed more volunteers for that. And so that's what happened. I met with him and I asked him, and the thing that I originally asked him to do was like, hey, will you come in and help me build this mud obstacle course for all of these students? But as time went on and he got to help me within that, and our relationship developed more and more, and then he was there at the event and saw all the students there and all that we were doing, he wanted to serve in the student ministry. And so there can be times where we have this initial goal and purpose. I had this initial goal and purpose that I needed help for Mud Bowl. I could not build a mud obstacle course and make it fun and excellent for the kids. I needed something more. I needed somebody else to be able to help me out. And so that was my initial goal for him. But I also had a different purpose and a different reason why I was asking, because I was hoping that I could build a relationship with him and eventually he would serve in the student ministry. There can be this initial onset, this initial thing that's there, but there can oftentimes be something deeper that's happening. And I share that because God is very similar in the way that he treats us. See, God has a purpose for each of us. You are placed on this earth, given the personality, the strengths, the weaknesses, all the things that make you you. God has given you those things, I think, because the world needed you. Danville, your community, your friends, your family needed you. And nobody else could do what you can with your strengths and your weaknesses. And so God's got a specific and beautiful purpose for you to further his kingdom in a way that is unique to you. But there's something different. There's something deeper. God's not just going to use you, and then when you get chipped or you get messed up, it's not like you're this hammer that he's just constantly plugging holes in or putting nails in with. And when you get chipped and when you get messed up and all these things can go wrong, he's not just going to toss you aside. That Jesus has a much bigger purpose, that he's got something that he wants you to do and accomplish in this world and furthering his kingdom, but he also wants to accomplish and do something within you. And that is what the book of Jonah is about. Jonah is one of the most unique books and unique prophets in all of the Old Testament. You have your major prophets, which just means their books are bigger, and then you have your minor prophets that you find, and their books are just smaller. That's all that means. Major and minor prophets are just bigger books and smaller books. But within all of them, as we come into Jonah, most of the other prophets, when they are talking, there's always this message from God that's given to the prophet. And this usually takes up a couple chapters within their books. It's never just a line. When you come into the book of Jonah, when God talks to Jonah and says, I'm sending you to the Ninevites, I want you to go and preach to them, there is one line that God tells Jonah. So from the very onset of the book of Jonah, it's completely different than all of the other prophets. It turns and it focuses on the story of Jonah, on what's happening within his life and what God's trying to do within the life of Jonah. And so the goal is that it holds itself up as a mirror for us to reflect and for us to look at and to think about. Because again, God's not just going to sit there and have a purpose and a mission for you to further his kingdom and not try to work within your own heart as well. And so this is where the prophet of Jonah becomes so unique and one of the things that I'm most excited about for this book. Because when we meet Jonah, Jonah's not really that great of a prophet, if we're honest. You're actually first introduced to Jonah in 2 Kings 14:23-25. In 2 Kings, he gives this prophecy to a guy named Jeroboam II. And Jeroboam II is the king of Israel, and he's very wicked, very evil. He gets the people to turn away from the Lord. But Jonah tells Jeroboam that God's going to work through him, and then actually the borders of the land are going to expand under his rule. But then we see that in Amos, who is another prophet that's alive during that time, in Amos 6:13-14, Amos is actually going to reverse this prophecy. And he's going to say that the kingdom's actually going to shrink because Jeroboam is so wicked and so evil that God's judgment's now going to come against his people. And so if we know this story, then when we are introduced to Jonah, we are skeptical at best. Because usually a prophet's words don't change. And so as we come into Jonah and we start to read his story, we know that things are different from the very beginning. And so let's jump in. Jonah 1:1-3. It says, "The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it because its wickedness has come before me." You see that? That's one line. All the other prophets, major lines, a lot of words that are being said, is one line from God to Jonah. Verse 3, "But Jonah ran away from the Lord, headed for Tarshish. He went down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port, and after paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord." So here's my question for you. Have you ever been asked to do something that you didn't want to do? And when you're asked to do something that you didn't want to do, how did you respond? I'd be willing to bet that, one, you're probably going to say, "No, I don't want to do this," and just put your foot down. But if you absolutely had to do it, are you going to do it with the best intentions, with the best heart, and the best character? Probably not. Right? Like typically, if we don't really want to do something and we're definitely set against it, I'm not giving my full heart into that. I kind of got to be like coached into that. And that's what we find with Jonah. Jonah does not want to go to Nineveh. And the reason being is that Nineveh is Israel's enemy. During this time of Jeroboam II, Israel is they're split into two kingdoms. There's the northern half of Israel. There's the southern half of Israel. This is the northern half that we're talking about. The Syrians are constantly making war and coming to war and coming against the nation of Israel. They're constantly pushing back, constantly engaging in war, constantly taking small chunks of land. And eventually the Assyrians win, and they take after and completely wipe out the northern kingdom. And so if you were a Jewish person living in that day, you know who you wouldn't like? The Ninevites. And you wouldn't like the Assyrians. Because Nineveh is a prominent city within Assyria. And so the Ninevites are not only just your enemy in this real sense because they're your spiritual enemy, because Assyria is just furthering and furthering evil wherever they go. And so in every sense of the term of enemy, they were Israel's enemy. The Israelites did not like them, and every time that they would have encountered them, it was always revolving around war. Always around death and conquering. And so when God says, "Hey, I want you to go to Nineveh," Jonah has no desire to go. And his response is not a trust in the character of God. His response is not in just trusting who God is or in the message of God. His response is, "I hate the Ninevites so much that I'm not going to go." And we're not really told why Jonah wants to leave and go to Tarshish. And Tarshish is a port city in Spain. That's where it's believed to be. So Nineveh is this way, and then Jonah's going this way. So Jonah's going to go the exact opposite. His point is that he hates the Ninevites so much that I'm not just going to stay in the nation of Israel and not do anything. I hate them so much that I'm going to actively set myself and go the opposite direction. That's how much Jonah does not want to go. And so in Jonah 4:2, we don't really figure out why Jonah doesn't want to go until chapter 4, verse 2, where he actually talks to the Lord about it. And when you read this, Jonah's not happy. This is not like a repentant prayer. This is not a good thing that we see with Jonah. Jonah's actually very angry, and he's pointing his finger at God. He says, he prayed to the Lord, "Isn't this what I said, Lord, when I was still at home? This is what I tried to forestall by fleeing to Tarshish. I know that you are gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity." Jonah's worst fear is that he would go to Nineveh, preach this message, and if the Ninevites repented, then God would show them compassion and mercy, and he would not destroy them. So Jonah's goal is, I'm going to prolong my time. I don't want to go because my hope, what I really want to happen, is that the Ninevites will eventually be destroyed. I want God to wipe them out. And so as we start to hold up this mirror on what the book of Jonah is really showing, is that there can be times and moments in our life where God is going to ask us to do things, or he's going to bring people into our lives for us to reach and for us to further his kingdom. And the question we have to ask is God going to be working through you to accomplish that? Or is God going to have to work in spite of you to accomplish that? And so as we start off with the first 3 verses, that's where I want us to sit and wrestle with. Is that, do you have people in your life that you cannot stand? People that you may not say you're your enemy, because Scripture says that we shouldn't have enemies and we should love them, but people that you don't like and you don't want to be around. People that you grit your teeth when they come around. Maybe God has you there for you to impact them, to draw them closer to him. But instead, our response is, I don't want them. I don't like them. I definitely don't want to share the message of hope with them. Or maybe we're so focused in on all these other things that are going around us that when God brings somebody in front of us, we can't see what he's trying to do. Because I'm so focused here, how can I focus on this? And it's so easy for us to lose sight of what we're supposed to be doing. That God has this grand purpose. And he wants us to reach the world. He wants us to reach our friends, our neighbors, and our family members for him. And yet, for whatever reason, we become so focused in on ourselves or other things, we don't want to. What I love about the book of Jonah is as you start to read it, God doesn't just change to a different prophet. And if we're honest with ourselves, he could have, right? God could have told Jonah, say, go to the Ninevites and go and preach this message to them. And when Jonah says, I'm not going, actually, I'm going to go to Tarshish, the exact opposite direction, God could have easily just said, okay, next person up. Right here, we're going to start with you. We're going to start with Jonah 2.0. I want you to go to the Ninevites. But he doesn't. The book of Jonah, its real focus is not on the Ninevites. The book of Jonah's focus is on this prophet of God that does not want to do what God's wanting him to do, does not want to follow God, does not want to trust God's character. He hates the Ninevites so much that he's not willing to trust God in what he's doing. And yet, God doesn't throw him aside. And so there can be true hope for each of us, because there's times and moments where when I've looked at my own life, God has had to work in spite of me. There's been moments where I've been close to the Lord, and he has worked through me to accomplish stuff, to further his kingdom. But if I'm honest, there's also been moments where God has had to work in spite of me, where I've become so focused in on something else that when God brings an ability for me to work and further his kingdom, whether it's with my own children or my wife, or whether it's with friends or family or people that I don't know, I'm so focused in on other things that God's having to work in spite of me. And as I sit back and I hold the mirror up to myself, which is what the book of Jonah is meant to do, there's this dread that can come over me, where I'm sitting there and I'm saying, man, I can remember distinct times where the Lord's called me and I know the Lord wanted me to do that, and I didn't do it. But the beautiful part, and the part that offers hope for us, is that God doesn't cast Jonah aside. God actually hunts down Jonah and makes it a lot more difficult on himself because of all the stuff he's trying to do to get Jonah to come back. And so for each of us, there's these 2 questions that we have to wrestle with. Is the first one is God working in spite of me, where he wants to work through me, but I'm so hard-hearted, I'm so focused on something else, or my hatred or my frustrations or my biases or whatever it is, But the second part is that there's hope that can be found there because God's not going to abandon you. Or God is going to pursue you, and we'll get to that in a minute. But He's not going to just leave you. And He's going to do everything He can to call you back to Him. And the book of Jonah actually ends on a cliffhanger because we don't know what happens with Jonah. It ends with God talking to Jonah, and then there's no response. So you don't know if Jonah's heart actually changes or not. And it's meant to be that way. Because again, as the mirror is held up, the point is not really necessarily even Jonah. It is what is going to be your response. And so each of you, no matter where you are in life or what you're doing, God has you here on the earth for a grand purpose and for you to reach friends and family and to further His kingdom in a way that only you can. Not in a way that I can, in a way that only you can. And are you going to be a person that's leaning into the Lord and trusting Him and furthering His kingdom? Or are you going to have to be where God's working in spite of you? That He's having to work around you when He all along wanted to use you and do something amazing, not only through you, but in you. I like, one of my favorite books is The Hobbit. And so in The Hobbit, there's this group of adventurers that goes out, and you're introduced to Bilbo, you're introduced to Gandalf, and there's Thorin, who is this leader of the dwarves. And their goal is to go to the Lonely Mountain. And so when they get to the Lonely Mountain, it's been taken over by a dragon, and their goal is to take their homeland back for the dwarves to move back into. And so they set on this adventure in the book to go back there, and they finally get there. They almost die multiple times, and it's miraculous that they get there. But they get there, they destroy the dragon, and then Thorin finds what they call the heart of the mountain. And the heart of the mountain is this precious gem, and it completely changes who he is. He becomes so focused in on that gem that he loses his ability to lead, and he doesn't care about anybody else within the adventuring party, any of his close friends, any of his family members, does not care about them. His only heart and his only focus is that precious gem. And so as the word gets out that the dragon's been defeated, now there's other armies that are coming in. And as the group of adventurers goes out to defend their land, they're not going out with Thorin in the lead. They're not going out because Thorin's this great leader and because they love him. They're actually having to head out because, in spite of Thorin, where he's staying back because the gem is so important to him. And so this once great leader that got the group there is now the one that's hiding because he wants to protect this gem at all costs. And as I was reading the book of Jonah, and I'm introduced to the book of Jonah, and we talk about those first 3 verses where the Lord wants Jonah to go and do something. But Jonah's hatred for these group of people is so intense that Jonah's not just content with staying put in Israel and not just doing anything. It is so intense that Jonah wants to go the other direction. And I look at my own life. There's so many times where I could be like Thorin, where something can capture my eye and I can become so focused in on it. That the Lord can have this grand purpose for me and what He's trying to do over here, but my attention and my focus is on whatever it is in front of me. And instead of God using me and I'm getting to experience God, I'm off this way. And God is having to work in spite of me. And as you come out the other side and you can see possibly what could have been, it's a pretty heartbreaking spot. When you are able to look back and say, man, I should have followed the Lord and did this. I knew the Lord was calling me here and I went this way. And as you come back and the Lord's gracious and His love is there for you and He restores you, there's still this part where you've missed out. So my encouragement for you as you sit this week, as we go throughout here, is for you to take the time to reflect on that one simple question. Is God going to be working through you, or is God going to be working in spite of you? That's a hard question. But it's one that we all need to ask ourselves. And that's what the book of Jonah starts off with. Jonah, prophet of God, Supposed to be close to the Lord, trusting Him, trusting His character, trusting who He is, trusting what He's wanting to do. He gets the message of the Lord and responds in the exact opposite way that he should. Or the Lord is now having to work in spite of it to bring him back. And so there's hope that's there, but we first have to start and we have to wrestle with where we are in reality. Are you really close to the Lord? Are you allowing him to work through you? Or if you're honest with yourself, is he working in spite of you? And then once you answer this question, then you can go and define the hope that the Lord's going to work with you. He's not going to abandon you. You're not some tool that when you get messed up or when you get chipped or when you're broken, he's just going to toss you aside and find the next one. It's not how God works. God's love for you is so amazing. He is so faithful to you that he's going to take the time to repair you, to get you where you need to be. And there's a lot of hope and peace that can be found there. But before you can get to this, you've got to ask yourself where you are. Are you like Jonah, where God's going to have to work in spite of you? Or are you close to the Lord and the Lord's allowing to work through you? And so is there any areas in your life at this time, at this moment, where God's calling you to do something, God's wanting you to further his kingdom? Are you trusting him in that? Are you allowing, because these people look different than you, or they dress different than you, or any number of things, they hurt you in the past, are you allowing these things to be the things that guide you? Are you going to trust in what the Lord is asking you to do? So that's it. We're going to find more hope. I promise the book is going to go from here. But I didn't want to cover too much today because I know we have communion. But the next story is going to be Jonah swallowed by the whale. And there's a lot to unpack there. So I wanted today just to sit with this initial question. And that's the purpose of the book of Jonah. It is for us to hold, the book of Jonah holds a mirror up to you. And you've got to take the time to look at it. So if you want the book of Jonah to really work, and for God's purpose with the book of Jonah to really have its way in your life, you've got to sit with some hard questions. And the first one is, does God work through you, or is God working in spite of you? Do you trust the Lord when he's calling you to do things, or can you come up with 1,000 reasons why you shouldn't do it? Let me pray for you, and then we'll go from there. Jesus, God, we come to you, and Lord, thank you for the book of Jonah. God, thank you that you want us to answer hard questions. Questions we don't like to think about because we want to think that we're good Christians. We want to think that we're close to you and following you. But there's times where we've got to hold up the mirror to ourselves, and me included. Am I really following you, and am I opening myself up? Are we opening ourselves up for what you are wanting to accomplish and what you're wanting to do through United Church and through the community? Or are we allowing other things to distract us, to have our focus, and we're not trusting you? And so, Lord, I pray for everyone here that we would take the time to ask that question, to hold that mirror up, and to reflect on it now and through this week to come. And Lord, I also pray that you wouldn't leave everyone there. Or Lord, that you would remind us that you love and care for us and that you're faithful to us. And that you're going to work to bring us closer to you. And so, God, I pray for our time now, and I ask these things in your name. Amen.